This is my Yamaha C5. Looks great, but it's really hard work to play. Its dynamics are all over the place and certain notes don't even sound. After some research, I realised that the action needed regulating. Having some technical background, I decided to have a go at it myself. The first thing I did was remove the keyboard action from the piano and set it up on a table where it would be easier to work on. The first job I wanted to do was clean up all the hammer felts. As you can see, they've been heavily grooved from years of playing. I wanted to sand them back so that they'd be smooth again. I'm showing the whole sanding process in real time for one hammer, so you can get a feel of the work that's required. Now, I've heard all sorts of horror stories on YouTube and piano forums about sanding hammer felts, so I was particularly careful when doing this. Some videos I'd seen show people with a sheet of sandpaper sanding whole groups of hammers at the same time. There was even one using a Dremel. I couldn't do this on the Yamaha action because all the hammers were at an angle, particularly the bass section. This meant I had to sand each one individually. I used some P180 wet and dry glued to a piece of wood with some P360 wet and dry glued on the other side. Starting with the P180, I sanded the felt towards the crown, following the contour of the hammer, front and back. It's best to keep any sanding on the crown to a minimum so the profile of the hammer isn't changed. I put a pencil line along the top of the hammers where they contact the strings, so I knew how much felt was being removed. Once the grooves were almost gone, I used the P360 to smooth the face of the hammer. Once all the sanding was finished, the hammers looked good as new. The next thing I did was clean up the hammer knuckles. These had deep grooves in the leather from the jack rubbing against it, and also the whipping window. I lightly sanded each knuckle until the grooves were smooth again. Once all the knuckles were sanded, the loose fluff was vacuumed up and a Teflon powder lubricant applied to the knuckles. All the excess Teflon powder was brushed away. I then took the action off the keyboard and removed all the keys so I could polish all the key pins. Once this was done, the keys were put back in position and the action put back. A straight edge was used to see how level the keys were. This showed a pronounced dip in the keys around the middle 4 octaves of the keyboard, with the octave below C being very obvious. Balance rail punchings were selected that would raise each key the desired amount to make them level. The punchings were placed in front of their respective key, and then the keys were removed. The felt on the balance rail was removed and the corresponding punching fitted, and then the felt was replaced. After all the punchings had been fitted, the keys were reassembled and then checked again. To set the hammer blow distance, I made an adjustable let-off jig. This was set to the piano string height. This is what the hammers looked like before I started the adjustment. I set up a laser line to indicate the required hammer blow distance and set them all accordingly. Next, I checked that all the jacks were aligned correctly under the hammer knuckles. I also checked that the end of the jack was just below the top of the whipping window so it could move back under the hammer knuckle for quick repetition. With everything checked and adjusted, I could now set the let-off and drop. Both were way out of adjustment, so I had to do it in stages. In videos showing how to adjust let-off and drop, for example on YouTube, usually have a well set up model and one parameter only is adjusted to show how that parameter is adjusted. In the real world, the action is all over the place. It's not set up. So there is a little bit of to and froing between parameters to slowly get to where it should be. In this case, the hammer lets off very low, so there is quite a bit of adjustment needed to bring it back up closer to the string. Once I'd adjusted the let-off to a point I was happy with, it was obvious the drop was excessive. So I had to adjust that to reduce the drop to a more acceptable level. With the drop adjusted, another fine adjustment was done on the let-off, and then the keys hit several times hard just to see that the hammer goes into check. This process was repeated 87 times. Once all the keys had their let-off and drop adjusted, the keyboard was put back into the piano and the let-off height checked against the actual string height. I'm very happy with the results of the regulation. The piano is far more responsive and the dynamic range has improved markedly.